Hello and welcome. My name is Raiden Ed Seth Griffin, and today I'd like to discuss values. And we're even going to do an activity today. It's a fun video. Values are the principles we choose to uphold in our daily lives. They're the standards to which we hold ourselves. I think of values as being pretty important to both restorative justice and living restoratively. They're a useful tool for both self development and creating and maintaining communities. I am someone who places a lot of importance on these sorts of things, so here we are. First of all, why should we bother with values? What's the point? It's a valid question, so I'll do my best to answer it. I think a lot of us have a vague sense of what our values are, and we know when we're acting against our values because it makes us feel bad. But I don't think it's a very common activity to sit down and write down what we value and really think about it and analyze them and come to conclusions about what it means to live into those values. But when you have that understanding of your values and you know how to live into them, and you can even determine what other people's values are just by talking to them, then you get this it's almost a superpower, to be honest, where you can be talking to someone and within a few moments you know, is this someone you want to associate with? And if the answer is no, you can just kind of cut it off there. For instance, I will occasionally find myself in class and there will be a cute person. Let's be honest. Lots of cute people in the world. And I'll start talking to them. We'll just be sort of chatting, did you do the homework? And they might say, oh no, I just had ChatGPT do it. Immediately, I know I'm good. I don't actually want to hang out with this person at all. And then I don't. So in that way, values are a good way for you to be able to manage your social relationships. But I think the biggest thing values do for you is for your self-esteem. They're an essential piece of that self-esteem puzzle. Lots of us struggle with knowing and understanding who we want to be and what we want to do in our lives. And I'm not just talking about careers. A big part of feeling good about yourself is knowing what kind of person you want to be and working to become that person. If you want your body to be a particular shape, then you need to put in the work to mold your body to that shape. Otherwise, you're just going to be unhappy with it. The same is true for the way we act and the way we think. If you want to think a certain way or act a certain way, understanding what way that is and what that looks like for you is important, because if you don't, then you're just going to have this vague sense of wanting to be different without any real direction on how to get there. So, values give you a sense of direction for your self development. There's a quote of Howard Zer's that I really like that speaks to this point pretty well. Again, we're back to Howard Zer. He says, I believe in ideals. Much of the time we fall short of them, but they remain a beacon, something toward which to aim, something against which to test our actions. They point a direction. Only with a sense of direction can we know when we are off the path. So, how do you figure out what your values are? You could always just sit there and think about it till you figure it out, but I know a lot of people like a more structured approach. So, I'm going to walk us through an activity called the Values Compass. For this activity, I recommend a piece of paper and a pencil, and probably access to the internet, which I assume you have if you're watching this video. First thing we want to do is find a list of core values that we want to browse. I did this by DuckDuckGoing core values and clicking on images until I found, I think it was probably just the first image that had a pink square with a list of words. Some of the lists you'll find are very long, like multiple hundreds of words. You don't necessarily need one that long. If you find a list that looks good to you that's 50 or 60 words, that's fine. You just need a list long enough to jog some ideas. Once you've found yourself a list, grab a pen and paper, or a pencil probably, and start going through the list and write down any one of those values that you think is inspiring, something that you believe in. It doesn't have to be the deepest thing ever that you believe in. It just has to be something that you sort of vaguely think is good. If you need to look up a definition, do that. If you have something that you value that isn't on the list, write that down too. The list itself that you find on the internet is not all that important. The point is your list. And right now, it's probably going to start looking pretty long. And that's okay because we're going to narrow it down later. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but this is what my list looks like. It's very long, and it's on both sides. This list is probably only slightly shorter than the image I found, but that's okay. Because now the second thing we're going to do is go through our list and item by item, just put a star next to the ones that you think are particularly valuable to you. This is still going to be a lot. It was still a lot for me, and that's okay. We're going to narrow it down even further in a minute. Now that you've got a list of values that is somewhere between slightly and considerably shorter than the lists we found online, here comes the hard part. You need to decide which of these values is the most important to you. The number I'm going to use is 4. 4 values that are your guiding principles in life. The reason I use 4 is because it makes for a convenient metaphor, a compass. North, east, south, and west replaced with your values. They guide you through life. Of course, though, if your list is currently 90 items long, 4 might seem like an arbitrarily cruel number. So use a number that makes sense to you, but I challenge you to keep it as small as possible. The reason you want to keep it small is because we're challenging ourselves to really analyze these values and find the ones that you just can't bear to not be on your list. This will require you to reckon with some things. Consider how you move through the world. If honesty is on your list, for example, then ask yourself, is there a situation where you'd ever lie? Or if you have empathy on your list, is there anyone you have no empathy for? These are difficult questions, but I wouldn't ask you to do anything I didn't think you could do and that I wouldn't do myself. You have to ask yourself difficult questions because otherwise your list just won't get any shorter. Take your time with this and don't be afraid to realize things about yourself. And consider, is this something I value or is this something I've been taught to value? That's a tough question too. While you're doing that, I recommend you pause the video, and when you're done, we can come back and I'll show you my list of 4. All right, I've got my list here. Truth be told, I did this a few weeks ago without really intending to put them on a video. This is just an activity I do all the time. Not all the time. I do this every once in a while. The point is, I'm putting myself out there. You don't have to. Your values should be personal to you. No one else has to understand them. I'm going to do my best to make sure you understand mine, but whatever if you don't. Throughout my process, I did a practice of combining a lot of things that I thought were related and could be turned into one value. So the first one on my list is sort of a combination of things. It's pluck. Pluck as in plucky, like a plucky young adventure hero. The reason I chose pluck is because it basically means courage. And I had courage on there, but I also wanted to combine it with an idea of something else, and that's being opportunistic. In this case, what I mean by pluck is having the courage to face adversity and do things that are hard and not hesitate at an opportunity when you see one just because you're scared. So, pluck. It's my list. Let me be corny. The next one on my list is humanity, or shared humanity. This showed up in the RJ definition video, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, humanity means in this case, I am like everyone, and everyone is like me. We're all human. Big empathy guy right here. The third one on my list is self-actualization. What I mean by that is finding my path, knowing my path and walking my path and learning from my mistakes. You can't become who you want to be if you don't learn from who you are and who you were. The fourth item on my values compass is radical honesty. Big fan of this one. I don't actually remember where I learned about radical honesty, but I learned about it some years ago, and since then, I think it's been on almost every one of my values compasses when I've gone back and done this activity. Radical honesty, as opposed to just honesty, is taking the opportunity to be honest. For example, when somebody asks you, "What have you been up to lately?" Well, I'll give you a personal example. When somebody asked me recently, "What have you been up to lately?" I was a little nervous to say it, but I told them, "I'm starting a YouTube channel. I'm recording videos where I talk about restorative justice and living restoratively." I was nervous to do this because it was a project that hadn't really been started yet, and so I didn't want to set an expectation that I wouldn't meet. But I did it anyway, and they were very supportive. The idea of radical honesty is to take the opportunity to be vulnerable and build trust. All right, I have my list of 4. Now you do too. Pat yourself on the back. But your work isn't done. I recommend you write these down and write down your explanations for what they mean so that you can look at them later. I don't expect you to have them memorized. I don't think you need to, because the point of the values activity, the values compass, is not memorization, it's reflection. Reflection is how you become. When you make a decision in your life, when you treat somebody a certain way, you'll reflect on it. You'll think back and you'll ask yourself, was I living into my values there? If you weren't, and you might not have been, then you don't have to beat yourself up over it. You just have to think about, how can I live into my values next time? And so, next time, when a similar situation comes up, you still might not live into your values, but you'll reflect again and you'll think, oh, right, I was supposed to do this. Well, maybe the next time you will remember, or maybe you won't. The point is, becoming is a long process that isn't linear. You'll have setbacks, you'll have successes, but the point is, the more you do it, the easier it will become. The more reflecting you do, the more natural it will become to reflect. And eventually, it will be so natural that even before you make the decision, you'll already be reflecting on your values. What can I do right now to live in my values? This process of remembering or trying to remember puts me in mind of something I learned in, I think, a psych of prejudice class, a psychology of prejudice, where we learned about something called self-regulation. I think it was self-regulation. Basically, the idea behind self-regulation is you have these thoughts that are basically automatic, but you don't like them. You want to change them. In the context of the psychology of prejudice, these are prejudicial thoughts. But we can use this practice for anything: behaviors, living into our values. And that process is basically what I just described. It's reflecting on how you act and thinking, what do I want to do next time? That process of reflecting turns those situations where you're making these decisions into cues to remember what your values are and how to live into them. The more of these cues you experience, the less effort it takes to change the behavior and change the thought. And as it gets more and more automatic, it stops becoming who you want to be and starts becoming who you are. When you integrate core values into your life, you start becoming who you want to be. It's not easy and it takes time, but it's something that's very doable and it's very rewarding. This video is already longer than I thought it would be. We still have to talk about communities. So we know how values work on the personal scale, but what role do they play in community building? When you're forming a group or community, whether that's a school club or in the workplace or a D&D group or something more informal like just a group of friends, knowing what the group's values are can really help to keep things running smoothly and help to mitigate a lot of disagreement. The way I like to do group values starts, as many of my favorite RJ things do, in circles. This process is a little formal, so make sure everybody's on board with it first. But I really like it. I recommend it. Pen and note cards are optional. Of course, everybody should gather into a circle, sitting or standing as they're comfortable, and pass out a pen and a note card, or not, to everybody. For this activity, everybody gets a few minutes to think about and come to a decision on what value they want to bring to the group. And if you have pen and note cards, they can write it down. Once everybody has the value that they want to bring, we go around in the circle. Each individual shares what value they want the group to uphold, and they explain why. And then you hold a bit of a discussion or a vote. And every single one of these values needs to be agreed on unanimously. You need to reach full consensus on every single one of them. So, for example, there's a particular story I think of where actually this didn't go so well. So maybe this is not the most effective example, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I remember I was at an RJ conference. I think I was 18 at the time because I had just, moved into the adult group. There was a youth and adults were separated for this. The point is, I was at an RJ conference. The biggest activity we did at this conference was led by the keynote speaker, whose name I remember, but I don't speak to them personally, so I'm not going to share their business without any sort of consent on their part. The point is, the keynote speaker was running this values activity. They had first run it with the youth, and then at the end of the day, it was time to do it with the adults. There were maybe 30 or 40 of us, so there were a lot of values to get through, but that didn't end up mattering too much. We didn't get very far. Pretty quick into the activity, someone brought the value of universal love. I don't know about you, but I agree with universal love. I think we should love everybody. But another member of the group, a woman in maybe her 40s, she said, "What about the pedophile down the street? Should we love him?" A lot of great points were made in the preceding discussion. We imagined probably that pedophile down the street was sort of a lonely person. They were ostracized by their community. We don't know their whole story. We don't have to agree with what they've done before, but the point is they are another human being just like us, and they're our neighbor, literally our neighbor. Maybe he needs some love too. After maybe about 10 or 15 minutes of back and forth discussion, this person in the group got up and left. She just couldn't agree with us on universal love. I tell this story even though it may not seem like the most successful application of this activity, because it is a good example of how this activity can, I don't really want to say weed people out, but it weeds people out. It makes sure your group is a group of people who value the same things. And that's not to say that that woman doesn't belong in any group. That's obviously not true. But it seems like our group was not the one for her. Anyway, by the end of this activity, you should have a list of your group's values that you all agreed on in consensus. This is helpful because you can write it down and refer back to it when something comes up, when something happens. If someone isn't living into your values, or none of you are, then it's a good opportunity to discuss how we want to act in this group, or maybe even reassess the values themselves. The final point I want to make about values is a crucial one, so don't click off now. Your values can, will, and should change. Okay, that was pretty much it. You can click off now. Your values aren't something you decide in your teens and then stick to for the rest of your life. Teens can't even stick to a favorite band. As a former teen, I should know. I encourage you to reflect on these values every few months, every year. See if they still resonate with you. And if they don't, change them. You don't have to stick to the same ones just because you decided a few months ago or a year ago that these were your values. You have changed in that time, so should they. Your values should reflect your growth. It's the end of the video, folks. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. If you feel comfortable, tell us what 4 values you have down in the comments below. I'm curious to see what sort of similarities and differences might pop up. Anyway, thank you for watching it to the end. I'll see you in the next one.